You're 3 days into a hunt, and it's working. The reindeer herd is close, the wind is at your back, your spear arm is steady. You've got meat, you've got fat reserves burning clean. Then the temperature drops another 10 degrees overnight, the herd scatters, and for the next 2 weeks, all you can find is rabbit. Skinny, late winter rabbit. Nothing else. You eat it every day. And you start to die anyway, not from the cold, not from a predator, but from the food in your stomach. This is Ice Age Europe, roughly 20,000 years ago, deep in the last glacial maximum, when ice sheets buried half the continent and average temperatures sat 10 degrees colder than today. And here's the part almost nobody expects. The thing that killed people out here most often wasn't the cold itself, it was running out of fat. Freezing to death was a real risk, but starving on a full stomach of lean meat was a faster, quieter one. So how do you survive a world actively trying to freeze and starve you at the same time? Let's find out how they actually did it. Number 1, the fire problem. So how do you keep a fire alive when everything around you is wet, frozen, or actively trying to bury it in snow? You don't just make fire, you manage it like a piece of infrastructure that never gets to fail. At sites like Klissura Cave in Greece and Kostenki in Russia, archaeologists have found hearths reused for generations, packed with charcoal layered so thick it reads like tree rings. These weren't one-off campfires. They were maintained, fed, and protected around the clock, often inside stone-lined pits that held heat like a primitive furnace. Think of it less like lighting a candle and more like running a power grid with no backup generator. If it goes down, everything downstream goes down with it. Cooking, warmth, toolmaking, protection. That's why firekeeping was a dedicated, rotating responsibility, not a chore for whoever felt like it. And here's a myth worth killing right now: the image of a caveman fumbling with 2 sticks in a blizzard. By the Upper Paleolithic, humans had strikers, tinder kits, and banked coals that could smolder for hours. This wasn't improvisation, it was engineering. Fire wasn't an event, it was infrastructure. Number 2, shelter that wasn't a cave. So if you're not living in a cave, and most of the time you weren't, what exactly are you living in? At Mezerich in Ukraine, archaeologists uncovered the remains of a hut built almost entirely from mammoth bones, jaws, skulls, and tusks, stacked and interlocked like a load-bearing puzzle, then covered in hides. Structures like this housed multiple families through the harshest stretch of winter, in open landscape with no cliff or rock overhang for protection. It's the Ice Age equivalent of building your house out of the materials the environment just handed you, the way a modern off-grid builder uses shipping containers because that's what's available and it works. The myth here is the cave dweller itself. Actual caves were used, but often seasonally, and often not as the primary home. Most people were engineering freestanding shelters on open, wind-blasted ground because that's where the food was. They didn't hide from the Ice Age, they built through it. Number 3, the fat problem. So why would eating meat every single day still be able to kill you? This is the thesis from the top, and here's the mechanism. Lean meat, the kind you get from a starving late winter rabbit or a stressed fat-depleted deer, is almost pure protein. Human bodies can only process so much protein before the liver can't keep up, and without fat or carbohydrates to balance it, you get a toxic buildup that causes diarrhea, weakness, and death within weeks. Later trappers and explorers had a name for it: rabbit starvation. Ice Age hunters clearly understood this risk long before anyone had a word for it. At sites across Ice Age Europe, bone assemblages show deliberate selection for fatty animals, mammoth, horse, and reindeer in their fat prime, and deliberate processing of bone marrow and grease, boiled and rendered out of bones that look almost stripped clean. It's the same instinct behind why modern endurance athletes obsess over fat and carb ratios, not just calories. Calories from the wrong source can still fail you. They weren't hunting for meat, they were hunting for fat. Number 4, the needle that changed everything. So how do you make clothing good enough to survive negative 40-degree wind chill? The answer isn't fur draped over your shoulders, it's tailoring. Eyed bone needles, some dating back over 40,000 years, have been found at sites like Denisova Cave in Siberia, alongside owls and scrapers used to work hide into fitted, layered garments, closer to a modern parka system than a blanket. Multiple layers, sinew stitching, tight seams at the wrists and neck where heat escapes fastest. This is your base layer, mid-layer, and shell, invented in the Paleolithic, without a single word of marketing copy behind it. And it directly enabled something bigger. Without tailored clothing, humans physically could not have pushed into Siberia and eventually across into the Americas. The needle isn't a footnote, it's an expansion pass. One tiny tool, one entire hemisphere. Number 5. The network you couldn't see. So how does one hunter's bad week not become one family's death sentence? Through other families. Isotope and material analysis from sites across Ice Age Europe shows raw materials, flint, shells, ivory, moving hundreds of kilometers from their source, passed hand to hand through neighboring groups who almost certainly weren't blood relatives. That's not trade in the modern sense. That's a survival insurance system built entirely on memory and obligation instead of currency. The myth to kill here is that Ice Age life was small, isolated bands fending for themselves. It was the opposite. Isolation was often the actual death sentence. A lone family had no buffer when the hunt went wrong. No single family survived the Ice Age alone. Number 6. Weapons that threw themselves further. So how do you take down a mammoth without ever getting close enough for it to kill you first? The spear thrower, the atlatl, is a simple hooked lever that effectively extends your throwing arm, launching a dart at speeds and distances a human arm alone could never manage. Examples carved from antler, some shaped into animals mid-leap, have been recovered from sites like France, at Fance, functional weapons that were also unmistakably art. It's the difference between throwing a punch and swinging a bat. Same motion, dramatically more force, same amount of effort. This wasn't a lucky invention that showed up once. Spear thrower designs refined over thousands of years, getting lighter, better balanced, more accurate, an actual engineering lineage iterated on generation after generation, like any modern tool. They didn't get stronger, they got smarter. Number 7. The paintings that weren't decoration. So out of everything they had to do just to survive the day, why did they spend hours deep underground painting animals on rock they'd never live to profit from? At Chauvet and Lascaux in France, painted somewhere between 17,000 and 36,000 years ago, are galleries of horses, lions, and mammoths rendered with shading, motion, and perspective techniques that wouldn't reappear in art history for tens of thousands of years. These weren't scratched near the entrance where daily life happened. Many are deep in total darkness, reachable only by firelight, clearly meant to be experienced deliberately, not stumbled on. Think of it less like graffiti and more like a cathedral, a space built and maintained purely for meaning, at real cost, by people who had almost nothing to spare. The myth to retire for good is that survival left no room for anything but survival. It's the reverse. The art is proof they had enough mastery over survival to spend scarce time, firelight, and pigment on something that fed nothing but the mind. They weren't just staying alive, they were already living. Zoom out far enough and the pattern repeats at every scale. It was never brute toughness that got humans through the Ice Age. It was information, passed down, refined, and shared faster than the environment could punish a single mistake. The managed fire, the mammoth bone hut, the fat rendered carefully out of stripped bone, the tailored hide seams, the trade network stretching past the horizon, the spear thrower refined generation after generation, the paintings deep in the dark, all of it is one species doing the same thing over and over, turning knowledge into insurance against a planet that offered none. The cold wasn't the real killer, ignorance was, and they outlearned it. New videos on prehistoric survival every week. Subscribe if you want the next one.